Hi there. I think we have a few folks joining. We're just about ready to get started. Sorry, I was coming in from a different session, so I'll give folks a minute or two to join. Feel free to use the chat to let me know. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. If someone can just confirm via chat that my audio is coming in well, my videos come in okay, and my slide deck that I have being shared here is coming okay. Can I get somebody to confirm that from the audience on the chat, please? Chat is on your right side panel. Okay, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate that. All right, that's our topic for today is going to be innovation in a time of disruption, and about how we would continue to be innovative during this time. Great. So welcome everybody to the 2 o'clock session here. We're going to be talking specifically about innovation and innovation methodology, and connect that directly to entrepreneurship and how we do that in a state of massive disruption as we're experiencing through this pandemic. I will do a quick intro to myself, and then we'll get started in more detail. By the way, feel free to ask questions at any time during the chat, and I'll try to respond to those as they come up. You don't have to wait till the end, in other words. So my name is Rajiv Menon. I'm the CEO at Informulate. We're a innovation and startup, a software consulting company, which means we build software products for clients, custom development, but we also apply innovation methodology, some of which we're going to be talking about today, in order to make sure those products actually solve real business problems. Apart from that, I've also founded Talent for Startups, which is an online matchmaking platform that you could go to right now if you're interested in learning about local startups and being a part of that. Go to t4s.us and you can create a profile and connect with folks there for our local community. I'm also a board member at CC Transportations, which is a local startup. I am a donor and mentor at Rally Makers Central Florida Social Enterprise Accelerator. I'm the organizer for Techstar Startup Week in Orlando, which won 2 global competitions in the last 3 years out of 150 cities, which we're very proud of. I'm also the chair-elect of the Orlando Tech Council, which is an initiative under the Orlando Economic Partnership that is trying to make a difference for our tech and startup ecosystem. So that was my marketing intro, but I'm going to reintroduce myself in a not so flattering way. Hi, my name is Rajiv Menon, and I am really dumb. I mean, tremendously uninformed and with almost no control of what's going on around me. You think I'm joking? Well, let's talk this through. I can't even remember my past with 100% accuracy. So let alone, what history says happened 5 years ago in the elections, or 10 years ago, or 100 years ago. I don't know any of that. I mean, I don't know for sure what happened. I don't know what's happening next week in the elections that are unfolding here. I have no idea how the world is going to be 5 years from now. I don't even understand what's going on right now. What are you guys thinking? What were you expecting me to talk about? And why did you come to my session? I have no idea, right? To make matters worse, I also have no control. I didn't choose to be 5'8", or have the number of allergies that I do, or be addicted to chocolate, or be on the wrong end of 45 years of age, right? I could go on and on, but you get the point. Whatever is the opposite of omniscient and omnipotent, that is me, right? So let's keep going. So it's not just me, right? We are all in that boat. How many of us were fully prepared for 2020? Look at what's happening this year. All the crazy stuff that's been happening, is just unbelievable. How many of us here actually feel like we know what is going on and are in control? None of us. And that's just how things are right now. And that's It's a reality that has been brought into sharp focus, but it was always true. It was never not true. So that's the bad news, right? Bad news is, we don't have control. Even the smartest people among us don't have control. I'll take a case of 100 years or so ago in 1900, at the turn of the last century. The smartest scientists and physicists in the world thought that they were approaching a scientific and technological plateau where there was nothing much left to be discovered. They knew about the atom, they knew about the cells, germs, gravity, evolution. It was all done. And they were kind of wondering, what's left to discover? Why would anybody want to be a scientist? And then within a decade or two of that notion being spread and being discussed, everything was upended. Einstein launched his relativity theories. A separate group of physicists came in and talked about what became quantum physics, completely changed how we understand the universe. And then, of course, there's penicillin, vaccines, airplanes, what have you, whole bunch of things, right? We feel disrupted right now because of the pandemic and because it affects almost all of us in more or less a significant way. And so we all connect to that. But it feels like a massive disruption, and it is. But think of all the various disruptions that were, in some cases, like, honestly, the pandemic has been a boon for tech companies and for companies that are already engaged in innovation. For them, they are making much more money than they did before. And they're launching things and have more capital to address a lot of things that they didn't have capital for before. But the disruptions that occurred have been happening for a long time. And it really depends on which side of that disruption equation you're on. Think of the physicists pre and post quantum physics. Think of the travel industry pre and post airplanes. Think of the most recently, like the mom and pop shops that are being disrupted by Amazon, car industry being disrupted by Tesla. Those are things that are happening on a massive scale, and in some ways were much more impactful to the people who are being disrupted than the current disruption of COVID in the economy, right? So what does that tell us? The takeaway from that is we need to be ready to respond to disruption because it is inevitable. And the only way to do that is to build your reinvention muscle, your transformation muscles. And that is all we will talk about today. So, as a leader, what do we do? People tend to focus on the things that they know, and this is typical of individuals. It's true of businesses. The founder of a mobile development company is going to be really good at that. He may not be so good at marketing, which keeps him or her behind the curve on that stuff and prevents them from scaling. Whatever is the limitation factor of the leader is going to be reflected in the business and the company, or the leaders for that matter. So there's little point in innovating in an area that is not critical to the business. Look at BlackBerry. They were the most innovative company at one point in time. And then they doubled down on what they knew, which was physical keyboards, instead of going after the new market, which they ignored, right? Until it was too late. So another indicator is the rate of disruption, the pace of disruption has been tremendously going up. In 1965, a company that went on the S&P 500 stayed there for 33 years. Today, that number is 15 years, and soon it's going to drop to 10 years, which means companies don't live very long because the rate and pace of disruption is increasing. So we should treat this not as the pandemic, but we should treat it as a fact of life that's happening regardless of the pandemic. There's going to be a lot of disruption, and the rate of that disruption is just going to increase. So if you care about innovation, are you in an organization that understands it or just talks about it? So let's talk about some of that. What is the difference between actually talking about it and doing innovation? And truth be told, the reality is growth is always limited by the ambition and the ability of the leader of that organization. So what holds us back? Fear holds us back. Fear causes bad design, bad decisions, kills the ambition, slows down growth, and all the symptoms and effects of a company that gets disrupted, you can follow that back to where they were afraid to do something, right? But we have to value curiosity and learning and personal growth over fear. And in any organization, employees can only do this if they feel safe and enabled by the leadership. Again, it goes back to what is the leadership's ceiling that they are unable to exceed, and what can we learn that will enable them to burst through that ceiling and bring the rest of the company with them. So we'll talk about that. One of the first things we need is the discipline of innovation methodology, right? So let's take a look at that. Now, the good news is that the discipline that you seek is well studied. It doesn't guarantee success, but it's well studied. And we know that if you do certain things, it improves your odds of success. We've got well-developed playbooks from looking at entrepreneurship over the last few decades. We've looked at how different companies have handled different disruptions and how they've responded to it. But what you cannot do is you cannot simply rely on your past experience, your past skills and knowledge that got you here. You might be doing great and you've done a lot of great stuff to get to the point you're in, but that also means that you are likely to be a victim of confirmation bias or the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you think you know something even though you don't really understand it and you're far detached from it. So you minimize the impact of what you don't know. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It drags you into a vicious cycle of not paying attention to reality, right? So what do we have to do? We have to have a plan. You have to embrace the uncertainty. You have to build a feedback loop, because that's critical to seeing if you're heading in the right direction. You need to run experiments, and then you need to build and grow continuously. That sounds doable, right? So why isn't everybody doing that? And why isn't that just a matter of course? Well, first let's define what is innovation. The word innovation is overused to the point of having lost its meaning. In fact, it's not even very well defined. I Googled it just a couple of days ago, and the first definition that came up, I kid you not, was innovation is the action or process of innovating. Talk about a self-referential definition, right? But let's see if we can do better than that. Looking at the innovation methodology in the books and how we're approaching that in the discipline that I talked about, innovation can really be defined as delivering a brand new value proposition or delivering an existing value proposition in a brand new way through a new channel, or delivering an existing value proposition to a brand new type of customer that wasn't receiving that value proposition in the past. So those are the three parts of an innovation that could lead it to be called an innovation, right? So this is in line with the methodologies we're going to be talking about shortly. Let's talk about some of the other terms here. What's the difference between incremental and disruptive innovation? Incremental is applied to an existing product or service, and disruptive is when you create an innovation that actually ends up creating a new category. So the iPhone was a product, but it launched a whole new category of touch-enabled smartphones. So that's a disruptive innovation. People often confuse creativity and innovation. They're not the same thing. Creativity is usually associated with the ideation phase. How do we approach something? How do we do something? Is really what it's about. New ideas. But unless that idea actually results in the new value proposition or the new delivery of that value proposition, it's not considered an innovation. Process versus culture is important. So I like this statement. I don't remember where I heard it, but culture is what your employees do when there isn't a process defined for them, right? So what are they doing by default when you haven't specifically told them what to do? So those are some of the terms that are important to keep in mind as we go forward. So let's talk about where we see some of this innovation happening and what we look at and say, oh, that's an innovative company. They're doing something right? So if you look at world-class innovation, at some of these companies that are on the screen there, you can point to a single great product or service, and you can say, hey, look, Tesla, awesome car, Amazon, changed the game for online shopping, and Apple, iPhone, etc. But if you look at a deeper level, you will see the journey and understand how the methodology and the culture behind it really got them to the point of that product or service. But more often than not, all of these companies that are on the screen right now, they're not a one-trick pony. They're not a one-product company, even if they seem like it. For example, Netflix, right? You might say, oh, Netflix, that's just a streaming service. It's a one-trick pony. It wasn't. How many of us remember when Netflix was launched? I don't know how long ago it was, but they were a DVD mail service, right? And Rupert just heard me talk about this a couple of days ago, but they were a company that was physically mailing you DVDs that you would then put into your computer and play. And all the website did was let you know what DVD you want to see next, right? But they doubled down on the concept of not defining their customer as somebody who wants DVDs, but they define their customer as somebody who wants awesome entertainment delivered to them in the most convenient way possible. And that changes the game, because then you follow that cookie trail of how you deliver that. And as things come up, new technologies come up, you get better and better at delivering that value proposition, and you forget about it, and you cannibalize your DVD business, because now nobody talks about DVDs anymore, right? And so if you look at that, as they follow that path, they've come to the point where there is a chief content officer at Netflix, and now their main focus is not building a platform for streaming, but it's about the data that they've collected about their customers and how they're using that data to launch and create new content that they own. So therefore, now the content officer gets paid more than the founder, Reed Hastings. That's how maniacally focused they are on the core value proposition and not just on a product or service. So that tells you a little bit about the methodology and the culture that led them to where they are today. There were a lot of streaming services. Why is Netflix the only one? There were a lot of online shopping companies. Why is Amazon the biggest, right? You could ask that question of any of those market leaders. All right, so moving on, let's look at some things that need to shift in our understanding in order to get to that innovative perspective that we're looking for. Some of the things that hold you back from being innovative are your own biases. And as leaders, we really need to inspect this. And I do this frequently in my own consulting and for myself, is how much of what I'm saying right now is trying to make myself feel good about what I've decided, like a rationalization, versus me actually trying to understand what's happening and trying to figure out the best way to approach something. So confirmation bias is when you're doubling down on your own understanding and sort of trying to broaden your understanding. And we can see this happening all the time with the polarized political climate as well. It's not just what you do with business, it affects you wherever you go. So some of these techniques are applicable at the personal level, they're applicable at the team level, they're applicable at the organizational level. Sunk cost bias, you spend some money, you got a result, and you want to justify what you spent, so you spend some more to make it happen, even though it actually not working for you. The anchoring effect, where one strong person makes a comment and then everybody kind of gravitates around that person instead of trying to look at a different perspective. And the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, as I mentioned, you don't know anything. For example, I don't know anything about quantum physics. And if somebody comes and tells me something about quantum physics, it's very easy for me to say, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that's real. But honestly, have I put the effort to really understand that? And I'm not an expert. I shouldn't be making that comment. So moving away from those, we want to get into having a lot of feedback loops. So an outsider gives us a great feedback loop. Like me as a consultant, I go into companies and bring that outsider perspective, where you're outside your echo chamber of what you're used to hearing, and you hear things from a different perspective. You want to let the best ideas win and not the ideas that you propose, right? You really have to develop that culture. And no matter what people say about Steve Jobs being a dictator at Apple, one thing that everybody gives him credit for is no matter how opinionated he was, he always let the best ideas win. Cross-functional teams, that way we don't have just all the people talking about making a decision on a feature being all developers or all marketing people. There needs to be cross-functional teams that challenge each other to get to the best results. And then, of course, predict and measure. You could get a lot of feedback, but if you're not making predictions of how you're going to use that feedback and measuring the results of that, you're not going to make much progress. All right, I know I'm coming at you pretty fast, so feel free to ask questions or slow me down if you want. I'm going to assume that everybody is glued and everybody's understanding all this stuff at the pace that I'm going. All right, so let's take a look at the current state. If you don't have some of this stuff that I just talked about, the current state of a lot of organizations, and I worked with many of them over the last 14 years of running Informulate, and prior to that, in my consulting time of working in the industry in software, this is rampant, right? There's a lack of alignment is all over the place. You can see it very easily in the first few meetings, first meeting itself. There's a lack of empowerment of individuals on what they think they're capable of doing within the organization. There's not a lot of transparency of why decisions are made and who made them for what reason. And outcomes aren't very quantified. Hey, like we want to increase our sales. We want to double our sales, right? And what happened when you made that announcement 6 months later? Did you increase it or not? How much did you meet and why not? Or, we're going to launch this product and it's going to launch us into a new, revenue stream. Did that happen or didn't happen? Why didn't it happen? Those conversations are important. And of course, the HIPPO principle, which is definitely relevant, is the highest paid person in the room, the opinion of the highest paid person in the room, the HIPPO, right? So if you're the highest paid person, chances are you say that this is what we need to do. We end up doing it. And there's that we talked about potentially, which is the alignment, the empowerment, the transparency, and the quantification of those decisions. All right. So if that's the current state, then what does the future state look like that we would aspire to, right? I like this quote from Elon Musk, build the machine that builds the machine. He was talking about the gigafactories, but I think it applies very much in an innovation methodology context, right? If we can get a deep obsession with our customers' context, and if we can build our culture to the point where everybody on the team, or as many as we can, have a sense of autonomy of how they control their own actions, have a sense of mastery where they feel like they're getting better and better with their work every day, every month, every year, and they have a sense of purpose that my joint efforts together with my team's purpose, without all of us together, is making a difference. Then you're going to get very close to the culture that we're trying to create, along with the transparency that comes from management and the alignment that they should choose to make with everybody on the team. And then layer that on with the quantification and the data-driven decision-making that we talked about. That would be a very impressive organization that is able to move the agenda of innovation forward very, very quickly. So that all sounds great. How do we get there? Okay, let's talk about you. I'm going to assume that most businesses, if not all of them, are part of a value stream, right? You're in the middle. There's a value stream leading up to you, and there's a value stream leading forward from you. Now, this could be a 3-step chain, or it could be a 30-step supply chain, whatever. But it's you're part of a value stream. You're playing a role in a larger context, right? Now, one of the common innovation patterns is value stream expansion, where you get broaden your scope and you overlap with your vendors and you overlap with your clients to the point where you're now getting you're delivering a bigger chunk of value, and therefore you can charge more for your services and you can increase your revenue, right? Sounds great. Now, let's take an example in the real world. Early 2000s, Microsoft was completely focused on software. It was much, much, much bigger than Apple. It relied on hardware partners, and they were moving completely online for sales of computer hardware through their vendors and for software through Microsoft's own site, right? And electronics shops and computer shops were kind of downsizing in the aftermath of the dot-com crash. And this was 2001. So what does Apple do in 2001? It opens its first Apple store at a time when physical stores are under threat. Everybody knows brick and mortar does not work. The word brick and mortar suggests not a nice thing about it, right? Nobody wants to do that. Why would you do that when you can do the same thing online much cheaper and much faster and more convenient, right? Apple doesn't listen to that. They go into the supply chain. They look at how their vendors are representing their brand. They don't like it. They feel they can have a much deeper connection with their customer if they represent their own brand. And everyone thought that was one of the dumbest moves ever for a small company to make a major investment into a physical store. Now, today, 19 years later, there's 506 stores in 25 countries. Okay, that sounds simple. Like, yeah, that was great, Apple. You did a great job. That was awesome decision to make and a big play to make. But you saw something that others didn't. But how do we know that? How do we know that while it's happening before you make that decision? What's worth the effort and what isn't? How much uncertainty there is? How do we reduce that uncertainty? And how do we know how much you should gamble on such efforts? Right? That's a hard question. Well, innovation methodology can help you give that can help us answer that question. Uh, I believe that innovation methodology as a concept really came to the fore, and I'm sure people talked about it before, but it really exploded with the launch of this particular book, which is one of my favorite books. And if anybody wants to send me their email address on chat here, I'll send you a PDF copy of the original book, my Bible, The Lean Startup. Um, in that book, Eric Ries really laid out, how you could approach innovation and reduce the uncertainty that is a fact of life for startups. And one of his quotes is, "Leadership requires creating conditions that enable employees to do the kinds of experimentation that entrepreneurship requires." Right? So, how do we do that experimentation? So, before you spend $20 million, can you spend a few $1,000s or a few $100,000 to de-risk your idea, right? That's called the minimum viable product. One of his major concepts that everybody talks about now, MVP, he coined it. He also talked about the build, measure, learn loop, which is the diagram that you see there. uh, the build, measure, learn loop is about putting an experiment out, measuring the results of that experiment, and then learning from it and responding to it by making another increment of value. Another concept that he put out there was the growth and value hypothesis. So there's two major hypotheses that make or break your business. There might be many assumptions, but there's two major ones, which is the value hypothesis is you expect that when you launch this product or service, it's going to create this value for this particular customer, right? That's your value hypothesis. Does that value exist? Or are you pretending that that value is going to exist, right? Does that value actually deliver the value that your customer expects? That's the first hypothesis. The second one is the growth hypothesis, which is once you have defined what that value is, how are you going to sell it? How are you going to communicate it? How are you going to message it to those customers through whatever channels that are out there to help them try out your product or service for the first time, right? And once they try it for the first time, your value hypothesis should kick in and they'll be like, yeah, it does work. I'm going to keep going. But how do you get them to try it out for the first time? And not only just how they try it out, but how much are you spending on that effort? That's all part of that growth hypothesis. Can you get them to try it out for cheaper, much, much cheaper than it costs to deliver that value, and how much you're charging them should obviously make sense, right? So you want to experiment on the riskiest assumption first. So you would start with one of those two hypotheses and then come up with an experiment at the cheapest possible way for you to validate the value hypothesis and to validate the growth hypothesis. And then you react from that. When you launch that MVP, you pivot or persevere. So if your prediction was that, hey, I'm going to put this website up and see how many people click on it, and your prediction was that we have 100,000 people go to the website and you have 20,000 signups, a 20% sign up rate, that's your prediction. You see what happens when you do that. And if you exceed your expectations or meet your expectations, great, let's persevere. But if you don't, then you have to be willing to ask some hard questions and redo the math on what you're going to do next and maybe pivot to a different value proposition. Hope that makes sense. All right, that's one innovation methodology, and there's a whole subculture of books around lean startup that I'm happy to share with people if you are interested in digging into it more. Another one is design thinking, and this comes at almost the same answers, but from a very different perspective. So if you think about lean startup, it's about the scientific method. You come up with a hypothesis, you test it, and then you react to how the experiment played out. Design thinking comes from a point of view of empathy. So Tim Brown, who's a chair at IDEO, said this: brainstorming is a structured way of breaking out of structure, and it takes practice and discipline again to really break out of your biases and your opinions about things, to really listen to what the customer is telling you and to put yourself in the customer's shoes. So the first step of that is to empathize, and you start with the human values, and then you think about the business value, and you think about the technology that needs to happen to deliver that value to that user, right? So you empathize, ideate, define, prototype, and test. So not very different, but it really has a very strong set of principles and techniques on the empathy part of it. All right, next one up is Agile. Now, Agile is, again, comparable, but it's different from a point of view of its focus on speed. The word Agile implies speed, implies velocity. So Jim Highsmith, who wrote the Adaptive Software Development book and one of the original signers of the Agile Manifesto, which sets out the principles and concepts behind, philosophy behind Agile, said this: agility is the ability to adapt and respond to change, which is what we've all been talking about, disruptions and responding to change. Agile organizations view change as an opportunity, not as a threat. So if you're a business that is aspiring to be innovative and you're looking at disruptions, you're not looking at it as, oh crap, what do I do now? It's about, well, what can we do because I have agility, because I have speed and I can react faster and I have confidence in that? How quickly can I respond to take advantage of this opportunity that sets me ahead of my competitors? Does that make sense? So how do we do that? Agile philosophy really revolves around doing things in small increments and quickly, rather than trying to do like this massive project and wait a long time for the value to be realized. You break it down into tiny pieces and you deliver immediate increments of value. And then there's concepts like retrospectives, where you do after action reviews to find out what's working, what's not working, and how you want to change direction and improve your processes, which leads to continuous improvement. And this whole thing brings about a much reduced time to market, and you are able to maneuver much faster if you have this execution framework. So Agile is very much an execution framework. All right, so if we understand Agile and we understand those three methodologies, one of the things that's going to help us is how we deal with data. As we talked about with Netflix, they're a powerhouse of data because they've collected all these viewing habits and all this stuff. They can build content that they know is going to work. They can be very sure that people are going to watch this show or this movie before they launch it, because they have much better data than the large movie studios who don't have access to the depth of data that they do. So we need to be making data-driven decisions. So what does data tell us and what does it not tell us, right? I made fun of the hippos, the highest paid person in the room, but they have their place, and there's a very important place for them. Let's talk about what data does and what it doesn't do. Data tells us who is using whatever they're using, the product or the feature, right? And how much they're using it, what part of the product they're using, how much they're paying and who's paying and not paying, and those kinds of things, right? Very quantifiable things, obviously, with data. Now, the hippos, their responsibility, I shouldn't call them hippos because this is a very important function, and it's not a derogatory word that we should use here, but the founders and the leaders, and their role is to not ignore the data, but try to answer the questions that the data brings out, right? So they should be looking at that data and they should be asking, well, why is this piece over here working and why is it not working over there? How can we increase the usage of this particular feature? How can we make it better, right? Someone has to come up with those ideas, and someone has to lead that process and then make it an experiment and put it back where you can then collect data. So there's the qualitative aspects of decision making and the quantitative, and they need to go hand in hand. And the budget you spend on the unvalidated assumptions should be low. The budget you spend on the validated assumptions to scale something out should be higher. All right, so let's talk about some of the stuff that we do at Informulate based on this, right? So once you understand the philosophy and the broad methodologies that have sprung up around innovation, you ask yourself, how do I implement this specifically in the context of my business, in my world, at my scale? So that was a problem that, of course, when Informulate tried to apply these concepts, we came up with as well. So we came up with a flavor of it for different scales of our customers. So experiment, execute, transform is a framework we practice for funded startup clients or for new product development groups where there's a high degree of uncertainty. Like it hasn't launched yet. We don't know what's going to happen. And we haven't discovered product market fit yet. And the team doesn't yet have a language around innovation. So we show them how to do that through experimentations, executing those experiments, and then transforming the culture as a result. Um, Now, on the bottom end, on the top end, for large enterprises that have so many features and large product or initiative that's already launched, this is a framework. Innovation governance is the framework that we currently implement for Stanford University, California. It's designed for a large product or initiative that is collaboration between multiple departments, and the problems have multiple facets, and there's problems with alignment and transparency and decision making. It's really hard to do innovation when you have that many leaders in a room. So we designed something that allows for creativity of the layers below that are actually interacting with the, making things happen, and also making sure that there's transparency from the decision making that comes from the top. And the way we do that is by setting the innovation theme, right? And then going into ideate. The innovation theme comes from the leaders. And then we use the ideation piece at the lowest levels of the people who are actually doing stuff, the employee level and the team lead level. And then we prioritize those ideas, we implement those ideas, we measure the learnings that come back when you launch those ideas, and then you evaluate, and then you go back and see what other ideas you have and should we pivot or persevere, and then we go back to that pool. But our innovation theme doesn't change very often. Our innovation theme is set by leadership, so we know that we're always steering the ship towards the theme that our leaders want us to steer towards, right? So that's the higher end, the enterprise level innovation. And then in the middle, we have SAMI, which is standardize, automate, monitor, iterate. And what we do there is really help companies that are not new product, they're not enterprise level, they're in the middle. How do we go from the bottom to the top, right? How do we scale an idea that has found a product market fit? So this is a line that I tell my clients, right? If you're innovating, but you're not scaling, that makes you the research department for your favorite competitor. Because think about it, you're coming up with this idea, you're proving that it works, and then you're not scaling it. So the market is largely untapped. Now you've proved to everybody that this thing works, and they're just going to take that and be a fast follower. So that's really something that companies need to guard against, especially in our community, in our region, where we don't have as much capital to scale quickly. So we really need to be careful about that. How do we do that? How do we scale when we have found product market fit? In this day and age, in 2020, we know there's no answer for scaling apart from technology. Like your technology has to be a part of how you respond to scaling issues. So unless you're Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, all of this doesn't happen inside one brain. You need an outside perspective to challenge your constraints and to bring in new solution options, technical solution options that you didn't even know were possible, that would enable you to scale using digital technologies and be transforming yourself digitally. All right, those are some of the things we do at Informulate, and here's some of the results. I mean, it wouldn't be fair to tell you what we do without showing you some results. So some of the results we saw were, very, very positive. At Stanford, they did not have the alignment and the simplification of how they roll out new features. We helped them do that. We created a new metric. We actually started measuring things that they had never measured before. And we created a culture of experimentation, and we launched multiple experiments. A single one of those increased the metric that they care about the most. The innovation theme that they cared about most was engagement. And we had just a single experiment increase that by 25%. And there was a lot more experiments that we ran. So at Massey, we had a very manual process that was taking a lot of time, and there was a lot of customer experience that needed to be addressed because the manual process was taking too long and inefficient. We automated that for them, And we saw an 85% gain in the amount of manual intervention it requires to deliver this value that their customers were looking for. And it also improved the reliability of the process, and it also enabled them to now, as they grow, they don't need to keep adding more manual resources to this particular thing, which is now able to scale much faster once you've automated it, right? That's the SAMI aspect, the automation part of it. And IPD Analytics is another client where we did work with them over a whole decade, and we built a comprehensive platform using agile processes and a scalable platform that they started with, a couple of dozen employees, and now they're up to 150 employees across 6 continents. And from a small company, a small business, they've now launched into very much in the mid-sized space due to the platform that enables them to collaborate, or enables them to publish, and do all of these features that we built for them from scratch. And they really created for themselves a unique, innovative, competitive advantage. All right, so we're getting close to the end here, but to quickly recap, and I'll be happy to take questions. So start thinking about what questions you have, and I'm happy to go into that with you. But as you step back, what do you want to take away from this talk? I'd love to leave you with a few things that you can think about. Innovation is not a buzzword to me, right? And to people who actually practice innovation, it's not a buzzword. It has a very specific playbook. And that playbook includes the science of it, experimentation, the speed, which includes agility and executing and time to market. And it has empathy, which is the design thinking aspect of really getting into your customer's shoes and understanding what is the core thing that they're trying to do. And I love this example. I think it's from Jobs to Be Done, the book by Clayton Christensen, where he says, nobody wants to buy a half-inch drill, right? And if you think about that on the surface, like, that's not true. These little half-inch drills are all over the place. There's millions of people buying them every day. But no, but he's actually right. They're not looking to buy the half-inch drill. They're looking to buy a half-inch hole. And that is really the core concept of empathy, where you're not looking at the surface level of, hey, this product sells, let's keep selling it. You got to ask yourself, what is selling on that product? What is the problem or job that this customer is trying to do, and create that empathy, which enables you to then look at the next stage of evolution or innovation that will solve that problem better than how you were solving it in the past. Right? So that's a key part of it. And if you have that methodology and you understand the science and the speed and the empathy, and you're building those processes and methodologies, what that's going to do is, like we talked about in the EET framework that we developed, experiment, execute, transform, as you do experimentation, as you execute data-driven decision making, you will transform. Your culture will change, and your culture will become more innovative. You'll start hearing a lot of why questions, right? And one of the principles of lean startup is the 5 whys technique, which came from lean manufacturing, right? Never stop with a surface level answer. We always ask deeper questions about the why. And there's a great example that I love to give, because it really illustrates the difference between leaders who take a question and they get an answer and they're okay with the surface level, or they really care to go deeper and be more innovative. For example, server goes down, and the site is down, and the CEO wants to know why that happened, right? And so they come up to the lead of the technology department, and they say, hey, what happened? Why is the server down? And they say, well, we pushed out some bad code. We'll fix it in an hour or so. It'll be fine. And of course, the CEO knows that something happened, and he knows that it's going to be fixed, and he could just walk away at that point, right? He or she could just walk away and say, yeah, okay, I know it's going to be fixed, great. But if they're really trying to be innovative, they can't stop at the surface level. They have to ask further questions. They have to go deeper. So they ask, why was the bad code rolled out there, right? And then the answer to that could be, well, there was a new guy we just brought onto the team. He didn't know our process. He kind of did this thing because, that's what he thought was the right thing to do, and he rolled it out. Okay, that's an answer. You could walk away again at that point, or you could dig deeper, and you could say, well, why did he not know the process, or he or she not know the process? And the answer to that could be something that is actionable. It could be that you don't have enough of a training mechanism in place for new employees to be able to do things at the level of quality that you want to be able to do in order to achieve the milestones and goals that you have for the company. So that is not a software problem. It's not a server problem. It's not a technical problem. It's a training problem, and it's a training problem that the CEO can then go and do something about. So that's a key part of where you stopping with your questioning, and sure, I mean, there's arguments that, hey, you're being a little bit of a, micromanager here. But you know what? There are, if you really want to be innovative, there is a concept at Toyota, I think it was, it's called Genbutsu Genchi, which means you have to go see for yourself. And if you are trying to be innovative, you have to have your own opinions on what is going on around you. And you can't be satisfied with the surface level of the answers that you're getting. And you don't have to be an a-hole about this. You can have a conversation and be nice about it. But to illustrate, in Toyota, some of the top executives, when they wanted to see what people think about the Toyota, and they were falling behind on certain rankings from customers and stuff like that, the Toyota executives were told by the boss that I want all of you out of this room right now, and I want you to go to the showrooms, and I want some of you to go to America, I want some of you to go over here to Europe, and I want you to go all of these places. And you're a Japanese guy or gal, and you're going to go sit in, you're going to ask permission from the dealer to follow a family that just bought a Toyota, and you're going to sit in the Toyota with them, drive home with them, and then find out what that experience was like. That is what commitment to customer empathy is like. Sounds weird, right? I mean, imagine this Japanese guy standing next to you who doesn't speak very well in English, and he's like, hey, can I come home with you, right? It's weird, but the point is that if it's done the right way with the right intentions, and that's a key point, is what is your intention with this, right? You're not trying to undercut somebody who gave you a report that you're now saying, hey, your report doesn't make sense. I just found out better information here. It's about collectively coming together as a team and being genuinely curious and innovative about how to move things forward. This also ties into the lean startup concept of get out of the building. Of course, it's much harder now in the middle of a pandemic, but get out of the building is a very important concept for people to go get their first person perspective on how their potential customers are doing things, how they're reacting to things, how are they solving certain problems. Okay, so what does that do? It takes methodology, it changes the culture, which then gives you the competitive advantage that you're looking for, which then enables you to respond to disruptions better, faster, cheaper than your competition. So don't shy away from disruption, seek it. And if you are a company that is trying to guard itself and fence itself off and try to maximize its profits without thinking about the future, then that is the culture of a company that will be disrupted. It may be a year or two, or it may be 5 years, but it will definitely get disrupted, because that is called rent seeking. You just tend to maximize what you already know, what you already have, without trying to acquire new skills, new methodologies, new culture, new technologies. That is definitely a losing game. It's just a matter of when. So you got to challenge your defaults about how you're protecting your current investments. And we saw that with Netflix, right? If Netflix was trying to protect its DVD sales, or if Apple was trying to protect its iPod sales, they would be a completely different company, and we wouldn't be talking about them today if they hadn't done what they did, which was to seek disruption and to challenge the defaults of the current organization and to reinvent themselves and to disrupt and cannibalize their own business before their competitor did. So when you do all of that, let's say you've got the best methodologies, let's say you've got a great outsider perspective, you've got a great culture, and you're doing all of these things, is that guaranteed that you're going to succeed? No, absolutely not, right? I mean, there's still things that could happen that could completely disrupt your business, but accepting that uncertainty is the first step. Is the knowledge of that uncertainty, right? The fact that this may or may not succeed. does that prevent you from taking the steps and from getting over the fears you have of the potential failures of time, money, credibility, whatever? Is that going to hold you back from taking the steps you need to take today? Or are you going to make that bet anyway, knowing that it's a risk? I mean, entrepreneurship, by definition, is a risk. And if you're risk averse, which may sound like a good thing, and we talked about that in a panel earlier today about the risk averse nature of investors in Orlando, right? Risk averse people aren't going to shape the future. That's just a fact. I mean, they might be able to be great at sustaining technologies of things that have already been developed and maximizing the value for that, but they're not going to be inventing the future. So if you want to be disruptive and you want to be aligned with potential disruptions coming down your way, then the top focus for you has to be learning and growth. And that is guaranteed. So if you follow the methodology, you follow the culture, you create the culture, guarantee is not success, but learning. And what are you learning about? You're learning about customer insight, which is the ultimate currency. If you know your customers better than other people, you will definitely have something that the market wants. You may not have a product, you may not have even any funding, but if you have a key customer insight that nobody else has, that by itself is monetizable. And there are plenty of startups in Silicon Valley where somebody in some sector, in some area, knows that certain thing exists. They find a way to validate it using the MVP and the experiments with very low capital. And they take that proof and the validation, and they go to these investors who are by themselves very well versed in innovation methodology, so they understand and they speak the same language, and they get it when you say, yes, this has been validated but not scaled. Well, scaling is what money does. So even if you just have that insight, you can take and monetize that. You don't really even need anything else. So customer insight is the ultimate currency. All right, so where does that leave us? Transformation begins with you. Like if you're a leader or you're an employee, all of this stuff that I just mentioned is completely accessible, very easily accessible on the internet. You can go read about the lean startup, design thinking. You can start asking questions at your workplace. You can start challenging your peers or even your reports, the people who are reporting to you when they say, hey, we can't do this or we can't do that. Come up with, once you read and understand these innovation methodologies, you should feel empowered to ask those questions and to come up with experiments that can get you the validation you need that will then lead you to those new value propositions that we're talking about. So that is it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and I'll definitely look for comments from you guys if you're still listening. Put in some questions here if you want. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left in this talk. And a quick shout out to That's My Company, and we're a local Orlando-based company that does innovation consulting, digital transformation, software product development, and we partner with your internal teams to do team enrichment as well. That's all I had, folks. Is everybody still awake? Can I get some hellos or questions or some kind of signs of life on chat here? Rupert, you asleep? All right, cool. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Anne, Corey, Ginger, Stephen. Glad you're all here. I really appreciate you joining and taking a few minutes. Hopefully, thanks, Charles. Hopefully, you guys learned a bit, and feel free to ping me if you have any questions. You can find my email address and contact information on the sessions list or on LinkedIn. You can message me in either of those venues. Thanks so much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your digital Orlando. Oh, I do have a question. Rupert, how do you motivate distributed teams to have more discipline? That is an excellent question. It's definitely a culture question. So while you could have processes that monitor people's throughput, and you can monitor how many story points they did that day in terms of an agile sprint and their overall delivery and all of that, how do you motivate them, right? So the key thing there is going back to the agile principles of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if I was to boil that down into one thing, it would be how connected do they feel to the organization, and how connected do they feel that the organization is to where they want to go in the future, right? So if I'm in a role where I feel this company is really taking care of the things that I want to learn and giving me opportunities the right way, and it's giving me training and all of those things, then I have autonomy because I'm driving my own bus. I have a sense that I'm driving my own bus. I'm getting the training and help I need to be a master of my craft, and then I have a purpose where I'm working with them to deliver something that has an overall value to society or to your clients. So if you have those, then it doesn't matter if you're working remotely or in person, you're definitely going to be motivated to do the best you can. Now, I do want to call out that the best you can changes based on what's going on, right? I mean, there's things that happen in your personal life, there's a pandemic raging, there's other things, stresses that come up. And so your best that you can do at that point may go up or down. But overall, you always want to be trying to do the best you can. And you can only do that if you have the AMP principle, autonomy, mastery, purpose. Hope that answered your question, Luca. All right, cool. Thanks for that. Let me know if anybody else has any questions. I'll wait for 30 seconds here if anybody has any urgent last minute questions. Going once, going twice, and gone. Well, I will take that to mean that everybody understood everything I just mentioned, and you're all experts in innovation methodology now. But hey, if anything comes up, feel free to give me a shout. Thank you all for joining. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and enjoy the rest of Digital Orlando. Thanks all. Bye.